As an introduction, before showing you the video slideshow of my life in Norway and later in Canada after emigrating in 1954, I would like to give you an insight of the history of the Saxe Innvik farm that has been documented to be in the Saxe Innvik family for 1,000 years or more. The Saxe Innvik farm is located near the shore, or bay, or vik as they say in Norway, in the Trondheimsfjord. Thus the name Saxe Innvik, sometimes Saxi Innvik. From this, the Saxe name developed into Saxvik with an X, Saxvik with a KS, Saxvik with a G at the end, and many other variations as noted in saxvik.ca/genealogy. About the year 1600, the Saxe or Saxi farm was split into two farms. One owner was John Saxvik with a G, and the other Lavrets Saxvik. In subsequent years, the two farms were split further with names Saxinvik Övre, which is upper, Nedre, which is lower, West, which is westerly, and some very small farms. Saxinvik Övre remained the main largest farm. The history of the Norwegian Vikings and Norwegian kings is described in the History of the Kings of Norway, titled Heimskringla, written by Snorri Sturlason, born in Iceland 1179 and died in 1241. Snorri is considered the greatest Icelandic poet, historian, and chieftain. He was the son of Norwegians that immigrated from Norway to settle in Iceland. Most of his work was written between the years 1223 and 1235. Snorri visited Norway many times and was invited to meet with Norwegian King Håkon IV. In the writings of Heimskringla, the farm Saxe Innvik was first noted in the saga about Magnus Berlegs. When King Olav, father of Magnus, died in 1090, Magnus was appointed king of all of Norway and ruled until 1103 when he was killed in Ireland. In chapter 16, page 681 of the King Magnus Berlegs saga, it is noted that he had a wife and many children. However, he also had a mistress named Sigrid, who bore him a son named Olaf. Sigrid is noted in the saga as the daughter of Saxe of Vik, a chieftain in the district of Trondheim. I recommend that you Google the internet to learn more about Snorri Sturlason and the Heimskringla saga, with details about Norwegian kings, including King Magnus Berlegs, all translated into English. Originally, Snorri wrote the saga in his Icelandic language that was similar to Old Norwegian or Old Norse, spoken in Norway and Iceland at the time. Iceland has retained their original Old Norse language with few changes for more than 1,000 years. The present Norwegian language has evolved and changed greatly over time, as have the Swedish and Danish languages. The structure and grammar of the present Norwegian language are similar to the present-day English. Hi there, I am Per Saxvik, born in 1925 in Oslo, Norway. My grandparents, as you noticed on the very bottom left of the slide, were Evan and Hanna Saxvik, who were born in the mid-1800s and died in the early 1900s. And the picture above my father's siblings, and they're noticed there by name. The picture on the bottom right are my parents, Halvor and Sophia Maria Saxvik. They were born in the late 1800s and died in the mid-1900s. And as you note from the text that my grandparents spelled their name Saksvik, as my father and mother used the name Saksvik with an X, for my father felt it was historically correct, and when he married my mother, he changed the name from Saksvik to Saksvik with an X. Hi there. This slide shows my grandparents on the top left, and a map of Norway, and the location of my grandparents' farm, Saxe in Vik Øvre, located just where the red dot is above Trondheim. The picture below to the right of my grandparents is a painting of the Saxe in Vik Øvre, and the painting was commissioned by my aunt Ingeborg. The barn on the bottom right is the barn which I saw for myself in 2010 when I visited Norway. I understand now the barn fell down and only showing the foundations. The top right is my uncle Edward and his wife Ragna Saxvik. They inherited the farm in 1921 when my grandfather died. Unfortunately, my uncle didn't manage the farm very well and lost the farm to the bank in 1927. Okay, this slide is all about my father, Halvor Saxvik. The picture on the top left is my father as an apprentice in the Norwegian Navy. He served on board the Tordenskjold, which you see below the picture. He was there for 1 year, and he stayed in the Navy after that and graduated to be an officer, and until he eventually came ashore and got a land job. Anyway, the picture shows my father on some of the ships and the ships he served on. Yes, this particular slide is all about my parents, Sophia Marie and Halvor Saxvik. The slide, the third from the left, is my father and mother and my oldest brother Roald. And if you notice the little animals she has on her shoulder, that's a fox, and one held in her hand. It's not a stuffed animal, it's just a skinned and preserved animal. That was the fashion in those days, in the early 1920s. The very left photo is my mother sitting on the chair, and the picture on the right of that, she is standing, and that was of my mother as a young teenager. The picture on the far right is my mother and father with my aunt Ingeborg and her husband. When I was about 2 years old, my brother Harald took me out into the snow with his sled and my sled to go down a hill not too far from our house. He tied my sled to the back of his sled and started going down the hill. Partway down, the rope came loose and my sled veered off and ended up under a parked car by the side of the road. Some adults picked me up and took me to the hospital in a flatbed truck. Harald was mortified and ran home to let my mother know. She rushed to the hospital in time to see the nurse trying to take off my new boots. I was not about to let her do this, and I was apparently fighting back. Fortunately, my mother was able to step in and help the nurse. The doctor was able to reattach the tip of my nose, but to this day I have a scar with visible stitches. In the picture on the left you see my scarred nose. Also on this slide you see a picture of a double-ender gaff-rigged sailboat, similar to the boat I used to own as a young teenager. I spent many hours sailing around Bleikøya. Here we see some pictures of my early years in and around Oslo, Norway. The top left picture was taken when I was 8 months old at Christmas 1925. In the picture below, I'm a toddler, probably throwing a stone at the photographer. The top middle picture shows my siblings, Roald, Harald, and Tullemor, my sister. Below you see me playing the drum in a parade on Bleikøya Island, where I spent most of my summers. My friend Lillemor, who lived on the island year-round, is shown in the two bottom right pictures. I managed to make contact with her by email, and we are still corresponding. At the top right, I'm seen with a group of my friends. We belong to a sports club called Peel, or Arrow in English. Before I was born, my father built a cabin on Blakey Island. In the picture just above me, I'm sitting on the steps of the cabin with my brother and a friend. At the bottom left, I am standing in front of the cabin as a teenager. The red arrows point to the location of the cabin on the island. At the top right, we are having a picnic in the garden with our family. At the bottom right, the industrial area you see used to be an island like Blakey. They leveled the whole island, connected it to the mainland, and made it into storage for oil and gas, etc. The tunnel on the right side of the picture goes under the highway and connects the industrial area to the main road into Oslo. The tunnel was designed by me in the early 1950s when I started my career as an engineer in Oslo. Well, this slide is from the Ruslaken Skole Boys Band in 1938. The boys band was started in 1933, and my mother and many parents were instrumental in starting it that year in 1933. I'm shown in the front row with the drum, and my mother is in the back row. At the top, you see the elementary school where I attended grade 1 to 7. Below that is my high school where I graduated after 5 years in 1944. On the left, you see my mother's apartment at Bygdalé 25B in Oslo. I lived there until I emigrated to Canada. This slide has a variety of photos. The top left is me as a youngster in Oslo. And as you note, my clothing there, I was sporting knickers, which was the norm in those days. Below that is my graduation picture from high school in 1944. And above to the right is me as a gymnast in the mid-1940s. Below in the middle is a pictures taken in Stockholm at the fountain with the statues, as you can notice. And the top right picture is the entrance to the Stockholm Institute of Technology, where I graduated as an engineer in 1949. The bottom right is my first car in Norway, a two-seater Fiat Tavolino. This particular slide is of showing good friends before I came to Canada in 1954. One of the girls on the left there, Vesla, she was my girlfriend at the time. And the other pictures skiing are taken just outside of Oslo in Holmenkollen. The top picture is taken from having lunch at Royal Norwegian Yacht Club. I can't remember the names of the girls, but I'm sure I do them. This slide is all about sailing in Oslofjord and the various boats my friends and I had in the years before I came to Canada. The bottom left is a bee dragon, and to the right of that is a double ender, 40 feet long, old clinker built wooden boat, and to the bottom middle right middle is a 30-foot sailboat, and above that is a picture of my two good friends Thomas Geffler and Terje Nyrén. And the bottom right is Terje again on the left. I am in the aft end of the boat, and to the right is Thomas and his wife Sonja. Here you see my bridge buddies from early 1950s. They were 5 girls and 3 guys. And pictures here are from basically from 17th of May, Norwegian Constitution Day, and we were walking around in the city and sitting on the steps of City Hall. The two pictures on the right are from when I took the girls and some of the guys out sailing. Okay, this slide is all about me leaving Norway on a freighter, which is shown there on the left. It's a Fred Olsen line freighter boat called the Laverit Svensson, and I left Bergen in about the end of 53, early 54, and we traveled from Bergen right across the Atlantic, down the Atlantic Ocean, through the Panama Canal, up the west coast of USA and Canada, and landed in Vancouver in March 1954. After landing in Vancouver, I got a job at Alcan in Kitimat on the west coast of Canada, and that was my first engineering job, and I stayed there until end of that year, until I came back to Vancouver and got another job down south. Yeah, this is pictures I have from Grouse Mountain taken in 1955. Ruthie and I were both weekend ski instructors at the Vancouver Sun Free Ski School. This slide is all about Ruthie and her parents and her siblings. She was brought up in St. Catharines, Ontario, and the pictures are from there. This slide is from the courting days in 1956, 1958. As you can see, we're having a dinner. Ruthie likes T-bone steaks, and she prepared. Yeah. On this slide, some of the pictures were taken again in Ruthie's place on West 13th in Vancouver. Also shown is my first car in Vancouver. It's a 1954 Studebaker. And then we went skiing on Seymour Mountain. The station wagon in the middle bottom is my second car in 1957 Pontiac. This slide shows the Canyon Boulevard, which was not named the Boulevard in 1914, and then it came to be Canyon Boulevard later. The picture next to us is the Ruthie having a picnic for us on the road right away in 1957. To the right is we've just finished a house in 1958, and it's now 843 Canyon Boulevard. Now this slide is from our wedding date, July the 18th, 1958. The other pictures are, we are on the honeymoon on the way from Vancouver to Yukon and Alaska. This slide is multiple things. On the very top left is a photo from 1955 of Chilko Lake. Chilko Lake is a rearing area for sockeye salmon. The picture in the middle right is a Yale fishway, a fishway I designed and built in 1957. And there's to the right where Ruthie's picture is shown, it's the same fishway, but she carved her name in the corner of the fresh concrete fishway there. The very far left is a schematic sketch of how the fishway works. These are the fishways on the Fraser River at Hell's Gate. Historically, about 30 million fish return to the Fraser River to spawn every year. In 1914, a railway tunnel collapsed into the river, blocking the salmon from swimming upstream, and from 1914 to 1944, only about 1,000 fish made it through each year. The first fishways were built in 1944, and I was involved in the design and construction from 1955 on. By the end of 1985, due to the fish race, the returning salmon was restored to 85% of historic numbers. On the left side, you see the Nadina River man-made spawning channel for sockeye salmon. The sockeye swim from the Westminster to Francois Lake and up the Nadina River, about 1,400 kilometers. The spawning channel provides a controlled environment. The other picture is a nighttime photo at Hell's Gate Rapids in the Fraser River. The lights allow the salmon to swim upriver during nighttime hours. Otherwise, they pile up in the dark at the bottom of the rapids and many die. All of these pictures are of our first sailboat, the Danish-built folk boat named Bambi. On the top left, Christian is in the Jolly Jumper. In the center, the boat is on the shore to paint the bottom with anti-fouling material. And on the right, under full sail in Howe Sound. The bottom left shows Ruti steering the boat in the inner harbor of Vancouver. Notice the skyline without any high-rises, maybe around the year 1959. And note the old Canadian flag at the time, the red ensign. The top left two pictures showing Ruti and me and Christian and me in front of the house on Canyon Boulevard. The top right picture is Christian on mini skis on top of a bed. Bottom row shows Ruti and Christian and Tim on my lap. Then Tim on the Jolly Jumper on board of our first sailboat named Bambi. On the bottom right, you see Christian and Tim skiing in the yard on Canyon Boulevard. On the left, you see our little family being photographed while we were walking on Granville Street. There's always a photographer on Granville Street when we were out there. On the next picture, we were celebrating one of the boys' birthdays at home. The top right picture would be at Buccaneer Bay in the Georgia Strait, where we spent many of our summer sailing holidays. They had beautiful beaches and tidal pools where kids can really enjoy it. The center bottom shows the kids tobogganing in our yard on Canyon Boulevard. To the right, we were day sailing in Howe Sound. This shows our second sailboat, a fiberglass boat, Gulf Island 29, designed by my friend Derek Cole. Together we built two boats, one for him and one for me. We bought the fiberglass hull on deck, and the rest we did all ourselves. We did all the woodwork inside and out, as well as the engine installation, windows, sails and mast, etc. The boat was launched into the Salt Chuck in 1968. My boat was called Jenta, which is Norwegian for girl. All the pictures show Ruti and me with the boat at the yacht club or in Howe Sound. On the 22nd of September 1976, I was going to fly from Powell River to Babine Lake in the Twin Otter with 18 people on board, 16 engineers and 2 pilots. We were going to inspect structural installations of fisheries engineering project. Shortly after taking off from Bella Bella, where we fueled the plane, the engines stalled and the plane crashed about 50 miles northeast of Bella Coola in a mountainous terrain. 1 person died and 4 others were seriously injured. We built a fire to alert other planes, and we were spotted about 6 hours later, and the Coast Guard was notified. A few hours later, a rescue helicopter arrived and first took the most seriously injured passenger to hospital in Bella Coola, while the rest of us stayed at the crash site overnight. The rescue pilot was quoted as saying, "The Twin Otter was smashed to smithereens. Anybody who got out of there alive is pretty lucky. 2 weeks later, I flew with Ruti to Russia on Airflot for 2 weeks tour of Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev and Yalta. I was still pretty shaken up and nursing a serious infection resulting from the Twin Otter crash. This slide and the next one are about the sailing trip I made in January of 1980. In December of 1979, I got a call from Jim Fraser, one of my friends at the West Vancouver Yacht Club. He asked me if I would like to sail with him from Mazatlan across the Pacific Ocean to the Marquesas, near Tahiti. I was able to get time off for the trip and flew from Vancouver to Mazatlan on December the 30th, 1979, and met up with Jim. After getting provisions, we set sail on January the 1st, 1980. We sailed for 25 days and covered 2,744 nautical miles. Much of the trip was fairly uneventful, although we did have a few powerful storms, as well as having to avoid big commercial freighters, particularly at night. The birds, whales, dolphins, etc. were plentiful throughout. The pictures on the slide shows you the boat, the Baron Rouge, a 37-foot Alberg design. To the left, you see me raising a bottle of champagne when we cross the equator. Below that, I am using a sextant to determine our position. At the very bottom, I set foot on the beach on Nukuhiva Island on the Marquesas. At the bottom right, we are passing through one of the storms on our journey. After a short stay on Nukuhiva, we set sail 90 miles south to Atona Bay on Hiva-Oa to visit the grave of Paul Gauguin, picture on the next slide. From there we set sail back to Nukuhiva after a few days. This was the end of the sailing trip for me. I carried on by air from here. On February the 15th, I flew from Nukuhiva to Tahiti, where I stayed for a week enjoying the weather, beaches and local flora, fauna and people before flying back to Vancouver. These pictures were all taken in the Marquesas and in Tahiti. Now this is our third sailboat named Blueback. She is a CNC 35 Mark II fiberglass boat. We bought her in 1981. The pictures show the boat in full sails in Georgia Strait and one with Ruti at the helm. Our house on 843 Canyon Boulevard was up for sale and it was sold October 2003. The agent was my daughter-in-law, Natalia. This is photos of the Castaway 3, a powerboat called the Trojan. And we bought the boat Castaway in 2002 from Victoria as our first and only powerboat. Ruti and I never really enjoyed powerboat cruising as much as sailing, and the boat was sold around 2008 before Ruti died. Well, Christian and Tim are growing up, going to university, getting married and moving out of the house. The family always would be together for Christmas and other special events. Most of the pictures you see here were taken in the 1980s. Christian and Tim are building their own families, and Ruti and I enjoy being very proud grandparents to the growing numbers of wonderful children in both families. The last grandchild to be born was Annika in 2007. I'm so grateful for that Ruti was able to enjoy the first couple of years of her life. After Christian and Tim grew up, Ruth and I were free to travel around the world. We visited many countries over the years, including Australia, China, Costa Rica, Mexico, Russia, Alaska, Thailand, Bali, Norway, Britain, Greenland, and many other destinations in North and South America and Europe. This one and the next two slides show some photos from many of those trips. Ruthie and I had planned to go to Norway together. So after she passed away in 2009, I decided to make the trip by myself in 2010. I flew first to Amsterdam and boarded a Holland America cruise ship. We sailed to Copenhagen, Denmark, where I met my brother Harald's two sons and some of their children. They drove all the way down from Gothenburg, Sweden, to have lunch with me. You can see them in photo number 1. Then the ship sailed to Oslo, Norway, where I met some relatives and old friends. In picture number 2, you can see us having lunch at the Grand Hotel in Oslo. The person sitting next to me is my nephew Per Halvor, one of my sister's sons. Cruising north from Oslo, we stopped in Ålesund, where I met cousins on my mother's side of the family. We also had lunch together and took picture number 3. In picture number 4 is another cousin on my mother's side who met me at the next port of call, Molde. He has been in a wheelchair since he had a car accident years ago. The final photo, number 5, was taken in Malvik, where I met relatives on my father's side of the family. In this photo, you'll see the granddaughter of my aunt Ingeborg. Her name is Ingjerd, and two of her brothers, Steinar on the left and Olav Christian on the right. Ingjerd's son Morten visited us many times while Ruth was alive, and also met Christian and Tim and some of my grandchildren. In photo number 1, you see the barn that was the last remaining part of the Saxe in Vik Øvre farm, where my father was born. Shortly after my visit, this barn was deemed unsafe and was torn down, except for the foundation, which is protected because of its historical significance after being on that site for 1,000 years or more. Picture 2 are both taken close to the North Cape, the most northerly point of mainland Norway. The top picture shows my meeting with a Laplander and one of his reindeer. The Laplanders are nomads moving between Russia, Finland, Sweden and Norway. In the bottom picture you can see North Cape as seen from the ship as we are starting the journey back south. Picture 3 are 2 photos taken in the town of Bergen, one of the major cities on the west coast of Norway. Bergen is known as an international commercial center since the 1600s. One picture shows the harbor, seen from the mountains. The other picture shows typical buildings surrounding the harbor that were part of the historical commercial center of Bergen. In September of 2011, I traveled to Newfoundland with my Norwegian friend Ingeborg Becken. We went to the very northwest corner of Newfoundland, called Lands og Meadows, where two Norwegian archaeologists, Anders Stine and Helge Ingstad, had searched for years. They excavated several Norse settlements dating back about 1,000 years. The settlements contain articles that could only have come from Norway, such as bolts, elu, games, etc. Picture number 1 shows the likely travel routes by the Vikings to North America. Picture 2 talks about the archaeologists. Picture 3 is a monument donated by the Norwegian royal family in memory of the Ingstads. Picture 4 is the bay around which the Viking settlements were found. Picture 5 and 6 show replica of a dwelling that was discovered. They did not want to disturb the original excavation and remnant of the old buildings. In 2004, Ruthie and I moved from 843 Canyon Boulevard in North Vancouver to the 13th floor on 2203 Bellevue Avenue in West Vancouver. We bought an apartment that faces south, east and north, with balconies both south and north. I have a beautiful view of the mountains to the north, the sunrise to the east, and the ocean and sunset to the south and southwest. Of course, we proudly celebrate both Canada Day with the Canadian ensign on July the 1st, as well as the Norwegian Constitution Day on May the 17th, flying the Norwegian flag. Ruthie and I have always felt really blessed by the wonderful family we have. I'm so proud of my sons and what they have accomplished. They both have wonderful families, and I'm so happy they live close by so I can visit often. On the right we see Christian and Natasha with their daughters Christina and Annika. On the left we see Tim and Karen with their children, Ben the oldest, Nicole and Neil. Christina and Nicole are both attending UBC in Vancouver. Christina is in her second year chemical engineering, and Nicole is studying kinesiology and is also in her second year. Nicole is also an active hockey player on the UBC Thunderbird women's team. Ben is a supervisor in a construction company. Neil is in high school and Annika in her first year of elementary school. I'm very proud of all of you, and I feel extremely grateful for your love and care for me.